Pot gets about that full, I shut off the sparge water so that I don't have a half a bucket of water left over when it's time to dump it into the compost, the spent grain. So I time it to where the wort's up to my 11-gallon mark there, and I shouldn't have much water left in the mash pot. At this point, I'm going to take a gravity reading, see how close we are, just to make sure. So the next step is to start loading the canner. The first thing you do is put the bottom rack in there, and about 3 inches of water in the bottom before you put any jars in. Okay, at this point I add 2 pellets of hops to each jar, and I found it just as easy to just ladle it from the pot into the jars until they're within an inch of the top is all you want. You want to leave a little bit of head space. Top of the rim and the threads with a wet paper towel so there's no sticky wort. Then you grab a lid, set it on there, a ring, and you screw the ring on there, snug, and I give it one little extra twist, but you do not want to crank them all the way down because you need to leave it just barely snug so that oxygen can escape as it starts to reach the 170-degree mark. Alright, I got 10 jars in the bottom layer. Put the rack on top of them for the second layer. Okay, the canner's loaded. Got 10 on the bottom, a rack, 9 on top. Now it's time to put the lid on. First thing you do is line up the arrows on the lid. There's a little latch right under there. That's a safety latch. You want to make sure it hooks. So you set the arrow just to the right and you turn it until the arrow lines up and the latch is latched, and that'll make it to where the lid won't come up in case there's an accident or you try to pull it off there while there's pressure in it. Okay, the lid's on. There's an even gap all the way around. All the cam locks are tightened down. Now it's time to fire it up. You make sure you do this without the weight on there. First thing you want to do, and this is important, you got to heat up the water to boiling until steam comes out of there, and you got to let it go for 10 minutes. What that does is it heats up all the jars and the liquid inside of them and everything to close to the boiling temperature, and at that point you put the weight on to build the pressure, build the heat. But 10 minutes without the weight on there with steady pressure coming out. Okay, when the vent starts to hiss and the gauge comes off the peg, like up to about 5 pounds, that's when I start my 10-minute timer. I let it go 10 minutes, then I reduce the flame, put the weight on. Okay, the timer went off, so it's time to reduce the heat and put the weight on. At this point, I turn the heat way down, almost off, and use a glove, because this is steam. With the 15-pound hole, set it over the spout and let it sit. And gradually increase the heat till you start to get a jiggle out of this metal. You don't want it jiggling all the time, you only want 1 to 2 jiggles per minute. That tells you that you're exactly at 15 pounds of pressure. Okay, that's what the weight looks and sounds like once it starts to jiggle. That's a constant jiggle, we don't want that, so we're going to turn the heat way down until it just jiggles 1 to 2 times per minute. The gauge is reading 15 pounds, so that's where we want to be. Now we just get that weight jiggling where we want it now. Okay, at this point I've got it adjusted about where I want it. So this is about the time I go and crack myself a beer, get a chair, and just sit and monitor the jiggle for 30 minutes is what I let it go for. Now, I don't like to leave it that way if anything goes wrong. But see, I can monitor that jiggle. Might as well do it with the beer in my hand, because when we're done with the 30 minutes, we're just going to shut this thing off and walk away for about 3 hours. Let it cool down by itself with the weight on. Okay, it's been over an hour, and as you can see, there's still about 5 pounds of pressure in this pressure canner. So even though it's tempting to try to cool it down, put a fan on it, speed things up, don't do it. Don't ask me why I know this. I got burnt pretty bad about 5 years ago. So just let it cool down by itself with the weight on. Don't take the weight off until that gauge gets down to 0, and then I'll set my timer for about an hour, at least 45 minutes. Then I'll take the weight off and let it sit for another half hour or so. To really play it safe, you want to be able to put both your hands on the sides of this kettle and be able to leave them there before you uncork it. At the end of the day, I got 38 quarts of wort ready for yeast starter. As you can see, the cold break material is pretty heavy in the bottom, but I'm not worried about that. We'll decant the liquid off when it's time to use them, and I think I'm good for many batches of beer.